Hello and welcome to Gar Borras Time Machine. This is episode number 76, and today, Gar, we're going to be wrapping up our season of holiday-themed shows. We're going to end it with Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve, and the thing, Gar, is I realize that we're a little past New Year's here, but I felt sick, so we still want to do this. So again, we're talking about Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. What are your memories of that show throughout your lifetime, Gar?
Well, of course, just like everybody, it's the ball drop in Times Square, and just having lived in California my entire life, so I really don't know the experience that New Yorkers, you know what I mean? Because this is something that is embraced by people that live in New York, and has a real, the biggest special connection, to it.
Yeah.
So it was just, just that interest of a person living in California, just kind of, not knowing about this experience and just, always being mesmerized because it was always something that I associated with New York.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring that up, Gar, because when we did our last episode talking about the Miracle on 34th Street, that's one thing that kind of came up during that, is the fact that you had mentioned, like, you yourself personally never been to New York all your life, and it's kind of a thing like you always wanted to do but never had the chance to do yet. And to kind of to tie in with that, being that the two major coasts is the East Coast and the West Coast, where we live. If you live on the West Coast, you always kind of had that dream of, like, I wish I could be there in New York to see that ball drop at midnight. But if I can't be there, the next best thing is to kind of see it on TV and kind of wish that I was there. And to talk about what a major event this is each year in New York, not just Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, but specifically the dropping of the ball, is I was hearing people, just even this year, paying major dollar, not just go to New York to take part in the event, but restaurants and stuff make it a big. I heard people were going to the local Applebee's on in Times Square, paying like $3,500 just to sit in the restaurant and watch the ball drop. Can you imagine paying that kind of money to go to Applebee's to experience it? Because it's in the heart of a town,
Well, I there's somebody that justified it.
Yeah, I mean, why not? And you can't blame Applebee's for doing that. If people will pay that money, why not? It's a great opportunity for business. Now, to give people a little historical background on this show, I learned that Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, Gar, first premiered on December 31st, 1972 on the NBC network. Originally, Dick Clark came up with the concept of New Year's Rockin' Eve because, Gar, he felt that famed popular entertainer, band leader Guy Lombardo, who was very big, I guess, back in the 1940s from what I was able to learn, his long-running CBS New Year's special should have some competition, and he thought he was just the guy to do that.
Well, Guy Lombardo's, it went for a long time.
Yeah.
Guy Lombardo's show, New Year's Eve show, started in 1929.
Wow.
So the popularity of his celebration of New Year's Eve was like, the biggest thing for many, many decades.
Yeah.
Before he started getting this competition. And by the time Dick Clark wound up doing this, it really was kind of time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, I was really, this was around the same time that the Beatles came to America.
Yeah.
When they did the first New Year's Rockin' Eve. And so I was like super young. I was just, maybe elementary, kindergarten, age,
Wow.
around that kind of age at that time. So I was too young to really know, about Guy Lombardo.
Yeah.
But I was well aware of, the transition between, the older generation that embraced Guy Lombardo's celebration, and the younger 1960s crowd, which was really that 1960s younger teenage kind of crowd was a very large demographic. For that time, because boomers was, that's the generation that we're talking about.
Sure.
That was during a time that there was a huge amount of growth, population growth in the United States, and the boomers represented that growth. And so that generation, the boomer generation, was really, really young at that time, and they were hungry for their own thing. And I was, even though I was so young, I kind of felt the same way. I really was not interested in what was popular entertainment at that time, which was, the Dean Martins, the Frank Sinatras, and all of that kind of stuff. That just really wasn't, what the younger generation at that time was interested in. They were much more interested in what was, going on that was modern, that was part of their generation. Yeah. It was what they were embracing. And so it was just a perfect timing for Dick Clark to actually do that. It was just completely ripe for that, the beginning of this new tradition that would wind up taking over.
Yeah, and I dare say that this is maybe the first time that happened. What I mean, Gar, is, as we do these episodes, we often learn that, hey, surprise, surprise, things actually took place, before there was a television set, in the house. And what I mean by that is, while I've heard the name Guy Lombardo, I'll be honest, I'm not too aware who the guy is. But in doing the research for this, even my mother and father, I told them we're going to do a show on Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, and I was talking about Guy Lombardo, and my father was arguing with my mother. He says, Guy Lombardo, they didn't even have TV until, the 1950s, and my mother was arguing back, but, Guy Lombardo, he was still famous with his band and doing what he did before he was ever on TV. So, again, we come to find out a lot of these entertainers got their start before there was ever a TV set in anybody's house.
Well, yeah, your mom was right. He was, Gar Lombardo was a household name, from his, the stuff that he was doing on radio. He wasn't just popular. He was literally a household name back in the 40s.
Yeah, and it's interesting, when by the time Dick Clark comes around, at this point, he had already been the host of American Bandstand, which we did a great episode on. People can go and check that out. But for him to kind of, and this is the start of Dick Clark in his, in his career. He's done American Bandstand at this point for several years. And he gets the bright idea, hey, you know what? Guy Lombardo, what he's doing is so popular. Everybody just expects he's the guy every year is going to do a New Year's special. That's kind of what this guy is known for. Why has nobody else thought of the idea, hey, we should have a competing show, or let's try to do something to compete with that. Give them some competition,
Yeah, compete, but with a completely different
audience. Yeah.
Yes, and that is what made it ripe. It was that audience, because that audience was very large, and a lot of people don't think about that. But yes, the boomers was during, the whole creation of that whole generation was during a real big population growth.
Yeah.
During that time. And so the boomer generation represented a very, very large demographic. And that large demographic didn't just support Dick Clark. It supported the musicians and made those musicians iconic from that time period. You know, everybody that's iconic from that time period was raised to that iconic level by the boomer generation because of what they were going out buying those posters, buying those records, buying all of that stuff, and all of those companies were making a ton of money off of what boomers were consuming at that time.
Yeah.
So I think people were seeing this, that were paying attention to the graphs and everything, showing growth in areas and things like that. I'm sure they were well aware of it, and that had a big reason why so much advertisement was targeted towards that younger generation at that time, because that's another phenomenon that was going on at that time. There was a lot of advertisement that was targeted towards that generation because of how much money was being spent by that younger generation.
Yeah, it's funny you mention that, because advertising was a big part of this, because, I mean, back in the day, Gar, we lost Mr. Gar Borras. Let's get him back on the line. Let's see, Gar Borras. We are calling Mr. Gar Borras.
Dude, I'm so sorry. I don't know what.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
Disconnected.
Hey, at least it's not because of a wildfire or anything like that. We want to send our prayers to all those people suffering through that. But
oh man, yes. Oh God, that just bringing that up, that really kind of gives a time stamp
on
to this episode.
Yeah,
is we're doing this during something that is completely unprecedented.
Yeah.
For Los Angeles, because we've had wildfires, but we've really never had anything to the magnitude of what's going on right now.
Yeah, as we speak, and Gar, as we sit here, you were bringing up what a big deal the advertisement for Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve was. I mean, I remember all the years growing up, that would be such a major thing every December to tune into, every New Year's Eve, and it would be heavily advertised for weeks, so who was going to be on the show, and if you were a performer, or an actor, comedian, or you got to even host a show with Dick Clark or something, that was a major event for your act,
Well, a lot of people don't know this, and I'm not sure if the people that listen to our show know this, but I actually performed on a Dick Clark Productions show.
Wow!
Way back in 1999, 2000, and I posted. The actual performance that I did on our Facebook. And so what I think I'll do, there's two things that I did for that show. Okay. Because the name of the show was called Your Big Break.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And there was the host was one of those two guys from Kid and Play.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
The guy that was in those movies at that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he had what looked like his hair went up to the sky.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It went really high. Well, he wound up cutting his hair, and he wound up being the host of this show, and he was great.
Wow.
And so what they did is it was at the very beginning of the explosion of tribute band phenomenon.
Yeah.
And which was like the late 90s.
Wow.
And it was when I first started doing tribute bands.
Wow.
And so at that time I was doing a Cheap Trick tribute. called Dream Police.
Wow, Gar.
And so we were doing a show at a strip club in Pasadena.
Okay. Yeah.
It wasn't a totally nude. It was kind of like a topless kind of a place. But they had rock bands, and every big tribute band, was performing at this place. It was like a really popular place for tribute bands to play at. And so we were performing there. And after our performance, there was this guy that came backstage, and he asked me if we wanted to perform on this show. And of course, he told me it was a Dick Clark show. And
there you go.
And so, he gave me his card, and I actually turned him down. And this is the reason, because at that time, in my memory, there was still the memory of a show that was being on there that was very similar to what he was talking about, called Star Search.
Okay, yeah.
And it was so corny, and the acts that were on it were just, everything was so corny. I just watched that show once, and I go, no, it's not for me.
Yeah.
And so I had in my mind that he was talking about our band being on a show like that, and I turned him down, and and then I went to a rehearsal, and I told them about it, and they said you're crazy, dude. And I said, and my rationalization was the rock band never wins these kind of shows, because it was kind of a competition show.
Yeah.
And the rock band is always the bastard child.
There you go. Yeah.
Of those type of shows. And they said, who cares if we don't win?
Yeah.
And I go, well, what do you mean? And they go, we would be on national TV.
Hello.
We would be seen by millions.
Yeah.
And that never crossed my mind.
See, wow.
So I grabbed the card and I called him back, and he said the producers really wanted us on that show.
Wow.
So what we did is we did a performance with the band, but we had to re-record all of the music. Unless if we didn't do that, they were going to do like karaoke tracks, or it was a high-end karaoke track, but it was still,
Yeah.
So we said, no, we'll go in the studio and we'll record it. And I just sang live on the show.
Wow.
Okay. And then the other part of the show that I also did a thing for showing on the internet now.
Yeah.
Was what they did is they did a thing kind of behind the scenes in my life.
Okay.
And so what they would do is they would show that first, me and my personal life.
Yeah.
And then the band would come out in like a big puff of smoke, and then we would do the performance as Cheap Trick. You know what I mean?
Total theatrics. Wow, I love that.
You can see the transition. You can see me in my regular life.
Yeah.
And then you can see the band as Cheap Trick. So I have both, the performance and that behind. And what they did in the behind the scenes thing is they did the producers were telling me fake Spinal Tap. They wanted to do something funny.
Wow.
And so we put together that, and so what I'll do is after this airs, I'll put up on my Facebook. And anybody that wants to see these, they
Clips.
can go to the Facebook and they can check out those performances that I actually got to do for a Dick Clark show.
I can't wait to see that.
So doing this episode, I'm sorry if I took a...
No, hey, we love hearing stuff like this, yeah.
This episode is real special to me because of that.
Wow, okay. I understand, Gar. And now getting back to today's topic, the first 2 years of Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, Gar, was anchored live from Times Square, like we said, in New York, where the New Year's ball would be dropped from Times Square once the clock struck midnight in a celebratory way to ring in the new year. The first 2 years of Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve also saw Three Dog Night co-host the show with Dick Clark. And get this, comedian George Carlin, who we've talked about in past episodes, he was co-hosting the show as well. In 1974, the show moved to ABC Network, where it has continued to be broadcast from ever since.
Yeah, well, and rightly so, because NBC was basically the way they were treating the show is like NBC was losing interest.
Wow.
and that's never good for longevity. You know what I mean? And so, Dick Clark had the incredible, foresight to be able to see the future potential of the show. It was the right move.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? If NBC wasn't going to support the show, and ABC was saying, "Hey, come on over here, we'll support your show," it was totally the right move.
And it's interesting it came on in 1972 when it did, because like we said, up until that point, every New Year's Eve, everybody would tune into Guy Lombardo's New Year's special on CBS, is what it said. And, so by the time they started having some competition with Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve, I was reading that, come 1977, Guy Lombardo gets sick and he dies, and they plan to carry on with his annual event, like in, like a tribute fashion. But it just got to the point where Dick Clark's, New Year's Rockin' Eve was more hip and more popular. And, with Guy Lombardo passing, it just kind of eventually surpassed it. And let's be honest, Gar, talking about your lifetime and my lifetime, when I think of like New Year's, that's what I think of Dick Clark. I mean, he's the first. That's the first name that kind of comes to mind. And what's interesting, and I was looking for photos to kind of post on the Facebook page to announce we were doing this today. And you would think since they've been doing this since 1972, there'd be a ton of photos like of Dick Clark's rock. I was able to come up with about 3 or 4. But they have a lot of the newer photos with Ryan Seacrest since he's took over it. But again, that's kind of just the state of the world, But again, because we come from a time we do, when we think of New Year's Eve, we think of Dick Clark.
Well, I think the reason why you don't really see a whole lot of, saved media from that time isn't because there wasn't a lot of it done.
Yeah.
I don't think that's the case. What really, seems to be much more logical explanation as to why you don't see much of it is because that generation isn't part of the digital generation.
Yeah,
and so they never actively saved it digitally or transferred it over to digital.
I think you're right.
To be able to be appreciated by future digital generations. It just because digital technology wasn't known and is kind of foreign to that generation.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just logical to understand because, during that time, tons and tons of pictures and media was done because that was the only way to spread the word back then.
In fact, that's what surprised me about that because that's what I remember mostly from, all my years of growing up. Like, I remember back in the day, especially like the 70s and the 80s, seeing all those great ads for Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve and great graphics. And it's just like, wow, I wish I could find some of those, but okay, it is what it is. Yeah.
I'm sure if somebody actively went back and started collecting that information and going and actually transferring it over to digital.
Yeah.
A immense wealth of samples of media at that time would just come to light. And I think the public eventually, might have an interest because it's part of human nature
Yeah.
to always look back.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And the old story. If you don't learn from
History.
past history, then you're doomed to repeat it again.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is a mantra that is so true.
Yeah. And then again, to just kind of give people a little bit of the timeline we're talking about, it said in 1972 when Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve first premiered, Dick Clark was then the popular host of the hit TV show American Bandstand. Now, again, so just think, American Bandstand, as we know, was a dance show. It was broadcast on TV, and they'd play all the latest hits. They'd have bands and performers come on and be part of a performance. And so it was really based around music. It's interesting that he would come up with this other thing to do once a year at New Year's Eve, also based around music. And like I said, a big part of tuning in every year was who was going to be playing that night. And I remember, and I came up with a list. We'll go over it before the end of today's episode. But you'd through the years see everybody like who all the popular artists were. You see like maybe Kool and the Gang, Michael Jackson, Cyndi Lauper, Huey Lewis, in the news.
Well, Dick Clark, actually, before he did the 1972 version,
Yeah.
He actually did one New Year's Eve special, I think, somewhere around 12 years before that.
Yeah.
But it was a one-time thing, and he was just kind of like a side reporter.
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of a thing. And so my suspicion, of course, I don't have anything to hang my hat on, but my suspicion is from doing that one time planted the seed in Dick Clark's mind to where eventually he started championing doing that on his own.
Yeah,
that's what I suspect. He never forgot doing that one time, and probably enjoyed it so much, that he wanted to make it a mainstay.
Yeah, in fact, what I read was, at one point Dick Clark felt that Guy Lombardo's New Year's special had become very outdated. He wanted to have a New Year's special of his own, which he dreamed would go on to become an annual tradition. And I think, he lived to see that dream come true.
Well, and that's why, I was alluding to it earlier, is that, being that the time was ripe, because the feeling of the younger generation, which, I was like really, really super young, but still, I was, I was aware of it at the time, but the feeling was very strong by that boomer generation at this rejection of the older big band,
music,
style of entertainment.
Yeah.
That feeling by the boomer generation was really strong at that time.
Yeah.
About that rejection of it.
Yeah, and on the flip side of that, I guess if that's all that you're offered up on TV for years and years, it's entertainment. It's better than nothing, if you know what I mean. And until Dick Clark does come along, and and he's got a more party-like atmosphere, and the music's a little more rockin', you don't really have anything to compare it to. So, if you're only getting one thing, spoon-fed to you, then you're going to take whatever, is on the TV screen.
Well, but then again, the younger generations now are used to entertainment being so immense and so diverse, because you have so many choices with all these choices on cable and streaming and all of these. It's like immense.
Sure.
But back during the time that we're talking about, you could count on one hand how many channels were available on TV
Yeah.
at that time.
I mean,
So you
yeah.
really had a tiny, a fraction of what's available today. A small fraction of what's available today was available back then.
Yeah, I mean, when we
It
were...
was
yeah.
so small of the choices that we all had, that people forget about that.
I think when we were growing up, Gar, there was 3 major networks: ABC, which was Channel 7, NBC, which was 4, and CBS, which was Channel 2. Here in LA.
Yes, when I was a kid, you had that, and then you had in Los Angeles in 1972, you could only count on 2 hands.
Yeah.
How many choices there were.
Yeah.
But back in the 1950s, you could only count on 1 hand how many choices there were.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
And people forget that.
Yeah.
There was so much less choices that we had during that time period.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think, but the public was satisfied with that at that time.
Yeah, I mean, and then I was also reading Dick Clark wanted his New Year's special to appeal to a younger audience, like we said, to have a party-like atmosphere, and to feature contemporary music, meaning all the modern kind of modern day hits. Let's be honest, you're not going to turn on Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve, and you're probably not going to hear him playing like straight heavy metal music, because they want to play more of a contemporary. It's like artists like Michael Jackson and maybe even Culture Club back in the day, or Kool and the Gang, bands like this, Huey Lewis and the News, bands that people have heard those hits on the radio. You're driving down your car, so everybody's hearing these music play. These bands are performing on the show. You're gonna, even if you're an average kind of music fan, you're gonna know these tunes.
Well, it was basically what they were doing was they wanted to appeal to what they wanted to appeal was they wanted to appeal to 2 demographics.
Yeah.
They wanted to appeal to the younger and what was considered at that time a more racy demographic, a younger and more racy demographic. But at the same time, they didn't want to go too far down that rabbit hole. And so they wanted to also appeal to the more conservative middle America, what we call much more clean cut.
Yeah.
The more clean cut crowd. And so they wanted to appeal to both of those demographics, which at that time was kind of like a phenomenon at that time, because at that time either you were trying to appeal to this or you were trying to appeal to that, but nobody was really trying to appeal to both of those demographics at that time. Which was another, you have to hand it to Dick Clark, because I think it is his foresight to try to appeal to both demographics instead of going too far in one direction or the other.
Yeah, and I think another built-in kind of part of audience was the American Bandstand audience, and then anybody that's a Dick Clark fan, because let's be honest, the interesting thing about Dick Clark as a personality, as an entertainer, is he was loved by everybody. I mean, so back in the day, if when American Bandstand on, he was loved by the teenagers, he was loved by the parents. Everybody pretty much was a Dick Clark fan,
Well, yeah, the same thing. He established with American Bandstand that you could appeal to both of those demographics.
Yeah. In fact, yeah.
And so he really proved his point, and really spearheaded a much wider target for an audience, and he made other people aware that you could
do that,
appeal to a much wider audience. So, I mean, there's so many things that you can hand to Dick Clark, for his vision. I mean, I think it was his vision that was his super sauce.
Yeah, and in fact, Dick Clark, to kind of drive that home, I mean, he got to a point in his career where he was much more than just American Bandstand and Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. I mean, he got to be the kind of entertainer that he ended up, such a major force in the TV industry that forming his own production company, Dick Clark Productions, and he got into producing other TV shows that were just as successful. He went on to be part of, some game shows and everything. So Dick Clark, had a long-standing career. He died at the age of 82, but that's another thing that, from doing all of this, that he was able to continue working in the TV industry all those years.
Well, the guy is an icon now.
Yeah. In fact, so much to the point that, we haven't even really got to that part yet of the episode, but when he did die and was no longer able to take part in the show, instead of they did get a new host, and we'll talk about that before we wrap this up today, but besides just getting a new host, he is such a major part of this. He's the creator of this. So in tribute, we're going to continue to call it Dick Clark's, New Year's Rockin' Eve, even though there's a new host. And I think that's really, like you said, just goes to prove what an icon the guy is.
Yes. Now, bringing up the ball, because you brought that up earlier.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't understand what's this. What is the dropping of a ball?
Yeah.
What is this? You know what I mean? And because it's so far in the future now, that we're completely. This is a technology that is so archaic that we're and has been left behind. Back during maritime days, before electricity and all of that, in order for people to be able to navigate, for ships to be able to navigate, they needed to be accurate with their time.
Yeah.
And so in order for ships to be able to calibrate their time, they would have people with periscopes to look at, certain either lighthouses. I don't know exactly where, but they would be watching for the ball drop so they could set their clocks to the ball drop. And so people on the ships could use that ball drop to calibrate and set their times, so their times would be accurate, and then their maritime readings as to where they actually are out in the ocean would be accurate.
Wow, I didn't even know that.
That's what the ball drop actually is. It was used for accuracy, so people wouldn't get lost out at sea. You know what I mean? Because they would do all their calculations on maps and all of that. And time was part of the accuracy of all of this. It was central, critical to the accuracy of all of these calculations.
Wow, Gar.
And that is what the ball drop is about.
Wow, that's why I do this show with you, Gar. You're always teaching us things we never even knew. I had no clue about that, but like you said, a big part of this show over years, of course, the main event, so to speak, is when the clock does strike midnight and the ball drops, and then they start the magical countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Happy 2025 Happy New Year! 2025 is now here. That's a big part of the show. And the thing, Gar, is another thing the show started doing, because you come to realize, okay, they're dropping the ball in New York. You and me are watching it from our home in Los Angeles, and you come to realize that this is a big world. There are other parts of the world. Now, another thing they do, so once they drop the ball in New York City, they'll go to other parts of the world where they got a camera. They'll say, okay, now Australia just turned midnight in Australia. Australia is celebrating the New Year because in different parts of the world, it's a different time. It's night or day, and so they also, that's become a part of the show. They show different parts of the world, celebrating and ringing in the New Year.
But also the popularity of counting down from 10,
yeah,
which is associated by me as, that's the only association that I know of, because that's the way it has been
all your
my
life.
entire life.
Yeah.
Was always counting from 10 down.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, that became popular from the New Year's Eve celebration.
Yeah.
But I remember doing the countdown because of the New Year's Eve celebration being so popular that anytime you were counting down, it became super popular to count down from 10. Yeah. That's when everybody together would start singing it out loud.
Yeah.
10,
9,
8. And that's, but that was not always part of the New Year's Eve tradition. That's a much more recent, from our generation, popularity. Wow. And that's the reason why our generation knows about that counting down from 10. But if you go to older generations, they really didn't know anything about that. That wasn't part of it.
Fascinating.
We don't know about it because it's just how we know it.
Yeah. Again, just we have that. That's what, from our memory, our lifetime. That's just fascinating. Now, Gar, let me ask you: in your performing career, have you ever played a New Year's Eve concert and gotten to do a countdown or anything like that?
That I was blessed with being able to do that twice, 2 years in a row.
Wow.
At one of the most popular venues in Los Angeles. So, it was at the House of Blues that was located on Sunset Strip.
Oh, wow.
And it was the first House of Blues that was opened up here locally in Los Angeles. And, I was blessed, to this day, it still remains goosebumps for me.
Probably because it's no longer there, the place, right?
Because what this means, see, I didn't know this until we were actually invited to do this. Because there are reasons why a venue will invite you to do this.
Okay.
Number one, it's a venue's thank you to you.
Wow.
For the shows that you did that were so hugely successful for their venue.
Wow.
I didn't know that until it was presented to me that was the reason why a venue it gives that to you. They invite you to do that.
Wow.
Okay, so that's number one. That is the reason why you were given that show. It's a thank you.
Wow.
By the venue to you for doing such incredible shows for their venue. That, number one, now you're kind of getting why it's a goosebump for me.
Yeah.
Okay. Number two, the reason why they do it, a lot of people don't know this, that you get paid double what you normally get paid.
Wow.
When you get invited to do a New Year's Eve show. Now that is starting to diminish nowadays.
Yeah,
There are, but during the time, it was a mainstay.
Wow.
That whenever you get invited to play New Year's Eve, not only is it a big thank you, but you get paid double what you normally get paid to play on New Year's Eve.
Wow.
So those are two things that a lot of people don't know about getting invited to do New Year's Eve. And when Live Nation and House of Blues did that, even though that venue doesn't exist and they closed it down, because of some big major thing that project that they're still building to this day. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's how big this whole complex is that they're building.
Wow.
But it doesn't. It still remains, as that venue, which. It is one of the most popular venues in Los Angeles, and that venue invited my band back twice.
Wow.
Not once, twice. 2 years in a row.
What a career highlight that must have been.
I am to this day, I am extremely grateful for that.
Yeah.
And it's an achievement that it's one of the most special achievements that I think I've achieved in my lifetime.
Well, good for you, Gar. What a career highlight that is. I don't think you'll be too surprised to learn this, Gar. Dick Clark was often referred to as the oldest teenager because like I said, I think the man died around age 82, and up until he had his stroke, he looked pretty. He looked a lot younger than what he was, and he just always kind of had that fresh look appeal. I don't know, but that's what they referred to him, and it said Dick Clark hosted the show until 2004 when he suffered a stroke. His speech had been affected because of the stroke, and since 2006, Ryan Seacrest has hosted the show. Dick Clark died in 2012, and the show is carried on without him. And interesting thing, it said on December 31st, 2021, the show celebrated its 50th anniversary. What a major milestone, Gar, that had to have been for this show.
Well, in looking at how not sidestepping the point that you're making, but the Ryan Seacrest thing kind of seems to be a double-edged sword.
Sure.
Nowadays, because what Ryan Seacrest represents and the reason why he was seen by Dick Clark and everybody else that's behind Dick Clark Productions. They saw Ryan Seacrest as a perpetuating of appealing to those same demographics that I was talking about. That was Dick Clark's, super sauce was appealing to, this demographic, and that instead of in appealing to one or the other, appealing to both. And Ryan Seacrest, in their eyes, represents that same thing. And that's the reason why they are so locked into him hosting it, because they see him perpetuating that. But the problem is, Ryan Seacrest does not appeal to that younger, racier crowd anymore.
Yeah, and in fact,
he only appeals to the other. And so now it's created a divide and an exodus of that other demographic, and does not speak well to ratings, because when you have a demographic that is leaving, it doesn't speak well to your ratings.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Because now you're limiting your appeal to only that one demographic.
Yeah.
Because that younger, racier demographic, it seems that they have left that behind.
Yeah, I dare say that when he was chosen as a replacement, it was in large part because there are many people, believe it or not, that see him as Dick Clark like-ish, or he has that kind of appeal. But the best way to put it, I would say, Ryan Seacrest. Say what you will about the guy, he's a tested commodity in that he can pretty much carry any show. I mean, we first learned of Ryan Seacrest, of course, through American Idol, and he's done many things since. He's also very much like Dick Clark was on the radio, and he's done many things. I mean, Pat Sajak left the Wheel of Fortune. He's a new host on that, so he's done many things, and he's a tested commodity in the point that any show that's looking to replace a host or something, well, we can fit Ryan Seacrest in there because he's got enough of a fan base that people will tune in still,
Yeah, but still, when you have a demographic that's being ignored now, that was part of the mainstay of that, it doesn't bode well.
Yeah, and I will admit, Gar, I'm not as big of a fan of the show as I used to be, and to be honest, if I'm honest, it is a large part to do with the fact that Dick Clark's no longer hosting the show. He's no longer among the living, as they say. But I have those memories of growing up, and Dick Clark was my guy. He was the guy that hosted the show. He was the guy that created and started it all. And I think that's a big part of it. Nothing against Ryan Seacrest, but part of me was surprised that okay, we're just gonna. You might have thought they might have just said, okay, Ryan Seacrest is a new guy. We're gonna just move on with him. But I dug the fact they still call it Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve to pay tribute and homage to him.
I was checking that out, and but what they do, they still call it Dick Clark's, but Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve with Ryan Seacrest. So his
name's in there. Yeah.
Demanded that if he was going to host it, that his name had to be part of it now.
Yeah.
So and of course, whenever you have your people negotiating for you, of course that's gonna be part of their negotiation.
Yeah.
A lot of people. But here's the thing: when I was doing the research for this episode, I came across a poll on Facebook.
Okay.
About Ryan Seacrest, being part of Dick Clark's, and the 5 stars. The highest rating was 5 stars, and then the lowest rating was 1 star.
Okay.
The 5 stars was tiny.
Mm.
The 1 stars was gigantic.
Yeah.
That is how the public feels about Ryan Seacrest, because Facebook, the demographics of the people on Facebook is mostly dominated by boomers.
Yeah, and I don't know this to be true, but I would also guess that the show with Ryan Seacrest is probably a lot more scripted, as opposed to when Dick Clark did it. Was totally, unscripted. He just would talk off the cuff, and I don't know why this is, Gar, but I've noticed, obviously, since Ryan Seacrest has taken over hosting duties, I don't know why it is, but it's not as heavily advertised beforehand. It's not as, a few nights before you might say, oh, tune in to Ryan Seacrest on Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve or whatever. But back in the day when we were growing up, they used to heavily advertise it. You see, they talk about who was going to be on the show, and they'd be going on Good Morning America and stuff like that for like a whole week in advance, talking about what they were going to do about dropping the ball. You just don't see that like you did back in the day. It's not as heavily promoted, and I think it's much more scripted, And he just kind of pretty much.
Those are all the signs
Yeah.
that I'm talking about. Those are all the signs of something that's waning.
Yeah.
And so it's the businessman in me.
Yeah.
The business, a successful business person pays attention to those things.
Yeah.
A non-successful businessman doesn't.
Yeah,
and so those things are critical things to pay attention to.
And it's always
and because those things point towards what kind of success you're having.
And it's
I mean, it's not a perfect system, but it really does point towards trends. And so you really need to pay attention to people need to pay attention to trends, because trends tell you where things are going.
And I hope I'm wrong, but I'm going to make a prediction here, Gar, that I think even 5-10 years down the line from now, something is going to come along and take the place of Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. I mean, like I said, even and like you said, part of it is just the digital age, but even as far as like looking up old photos of Dick Clark's Rockin' New Year's Eve with him, there's not a ton of photos and not a ton of images. We kind of discussed that, but the other thing is, Dick Clark passed away in 2012, I believe it said, and as more time passes on, people tune in each year. They weren't around to see it when we were growing up, so they're like, "Who is Dick Clark?" And the more and more time goes by, you got Ryan Seacrest or whoever is going to be the next host come along, and it's like, "Who's Dick Clark?" And so it gets to a point. Everything does. I mean, like we done episodes on the Tonight Show. It said before the Tonight Show, of course, Ed Sullivan was a very popular variety show, but then it had been on TV for so many years. At one point, it was the longest running variety show on TV. The Tonight Show comes along and steals its thunder, and eventually the Ed Sullivan Show gets knocked off the air just because of the simple fact the Tonight Show became more popular.
Well, and just like Dick Clark wound up
stealing
taking over popularity over Guy Lombardo. Guy Lombardo's descent was a slow descent.
Yeah.
It wasn't something that happened just because of his death.
Yeah.
It was a slow, the same trends were happening to Guy Lombardo at that time that are happening with Dick Clark, his New Year's Eve. And so I predict it's going to be a slow transition.
Yeah, something else.
But eventually, this younger generation, it's everything is starting to become ripe, just like when Dick Clark launched his back in 1972. It was ripe. Just like that, that is exactly how it's going to happen, and Dick Clark's going to become the new Guy Lombardo.
Yeah, and Gar, we'll wrap up today's episode with a couple things, because I urge people, if you've enjoyed today's episode, also go check out the episode we did on American Bandstand. And as we wrap up today's episode, another thing that popped into my mind, Gar, is the fact that I think American Bandstand, if I remember, was on for about 50, close to 50 years. And when it got to that point, eventually the show's ratings started to dip. Eventually, Dick Clark steps away from the, show. They get another kind of what they thought was a hipper host, but then immediately the ratings went down. It didn't take very long. They eventually pulled it from there, and it went down in TV history. But I think a lot of the TV shows we grew up on, they have a lifespan like that,
It's the normal. lifespan.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like what we described happened to Guy Lombardo.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, that's exactly, you know what I mean? All of it is exactly how everything normally transitions from one thing that loses popularity and then winds up, popularity jumping to something else that becomes the new popular thing.
Yeah, and then
It's just the way that life is.
Yeah, and Gar, to really kind of take this home about talk a little bit about the cultural and world impact of Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. Yeah, I said world impact. This is a show where they drop the ball at midnight every year in Times Square, coming from New York, but this show has had a major impact on the world. It says Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve. It should be noted that the show is broadcast in over 150 countries, which makes it one of the most watched New Year's events watched all around the world each and every year.
Well, yeah, and it still kind of goes back to the world's interest in America. Because for the longest time, America has been this shining beacon of what everybody else would like to be. Mm-hmm. So it just represents that.
Yeah.
The world's interest. Just like the world's interest in football. Now you see football being shown in Europe.
Yeah.
And all these other places. It's just the world's interest in what's popular in America. Now there's something else that I discovered in doing research for this show, but it's really a feather in Dick Clark's cap.
Yeah.
That I think the rest of the world should be aware of, because it's a really, really good thing that he did. Mm-hmm. Back in 2001, Dick Clark filed. He wound up suing the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences. That was being headed by a guy named Michael Green. He was the president and chief executive. Dick Clark sued, because alleging that they had a policy that prevented, stars like Britney Spears, Michael Jackson, Sean Diddy Combs, and Toni Braxton from performing on both. They prevented these artists, these major artists. If you performed on the Grammys, then they threatened them, about performing on Dick Clark's shows.
Wow!
You see what I'm saying? And so, Dick Clark. I have a feeling because when I found out about this, it doesn't say whether he won or lost, but I have a feeling that the National Academy wound up settling.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Because usually when you don't find out who won, it's because they settled.
Oh, okay.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that is a dastardly act by the president of the National Academy of Recording Arts and Sciences, to threaten these artists, about performing on other shows that they didn't approve of or didn't have financial beneficial interests in.
I think that just goes,
and
that just goes to show how big of an entity of his own Dick Clark and Dick Clark Productions went on to become. That I guess the Grammys, all these other shows did not like the thought of even having to compete with Dick Clark. I mean, that just is very kind of mind-boggling and amazing. And Gar, this is you're gonna love what I'm about ready to say because this really kind of says it all about Dick Clark and the show he created. It said Dick Clark's desire to have a New Year's special that featured live entertainment, contemporary popular music, guaranteed that it would resonate with each and every new generation. Proof of that, Gar, is the fact that the show has continued to be broadcast for over 50 years now and is just as popular as ever.
Well, I haven't watched it in years.
Me too. Yeah.
It really has to do with the fact that Dick Clark's really not part of it.
Yeah.
You alluded to the same thing.
Yeah.
But once Dick Clark passed away, it just kind of lost its luster, and I think we're kind of representative of that. That I think that's the reason why a lot of people are kind of dropping off.
Yeah.
And it's being replaced by a newer generation. But it all, nobody has a crystal ball, and nobody can predict the future, and I'm not somebody that can predict the future, but the only thing I can say is eventually, that it's going to wind up taking its natural course, just like everything else. And I don't say that with negative intentions or anything. It's just a more realistic recognition.
It's just a fact of life, and just a few more thoughts, Gar, because some of the major acts to perform on Dick Clark's New Year's Rockin' Eve over the years has included, get this, Helen Reddy, the OJs, Kiss, the Village People, Donna Summer, Spice Girls, Mariah Carey, Britney Spears, Huey Lewis, Cyndi Lauper, and the thing of it is, Gar, these are all major kind of acts that made a major impact on the music industry. And even like I said, you're a casual observer. I'm not a huge Spice Girls fan, but I'm aware of the Spice Girls. I know who they were. Cyndi Lauper, of course, girls just want to have fun. I mean, and the show is at an age where, like some of these people are no longer with us. Some are getting older. Cyndi Lauper is now a senior citizen. I mean, we've lived through the show, 50 plus years of it.
Well, but then again, you can't forget about the first musical act to ever perform on the Dick Clark New Year's Eve special, which they was also infused in the name of the first episode of Dick Clark's New Year's Eve.
Yeah, Three Dog Night.
Rockin' New Year's Eve. It was Three Dog Night.
Yeah.
And that Three Dog Night back in 1972 was at the apex of their popularity and was a perfect vehicle for that transition of appealing to that younger, racier demographic of that time.
Yeah.
Three Dog Night was a perfect musical act
to get it
to represent that transition.
Yeah, and Gar, another thing we should mention before we wrap this up today is that another big part of the show over the years was not just the musical performances and the comedians and people that would come on and co-host, but you'd have people from hit shows like you might have the cast of Welcome Back Kotter, Three's Company pop up at Times Square, and they go on the mic and talk to Dick Clark, about what they were doing and that, and so that was another aspect of the show as well.
Yes, it was a feather in performers' caps to be able to have on their resume that they performed. At Dick Clark's New Year's Eve, Rockin' New Year's Eve.
Yeah.
So it was a highly coveted gig for any entertainer, whether you were a actor, actress, or musician. You see what I'm saying?
Sure.
It was something that was it was recognized by entertainers the same way that I recognize being invited to play at the House of Blues.
Yeah.
It was that same kind of feather in your cap to be able to have that in your resume.
Yeah. And finally, Dick Clark died on April 12th, 2012. He was 82 years old, as we said, and he died from complications of the stroke he'd had a few years earlier. But it got to the point where he couldn't talk too much, and so he was into kind of forced into retirement. But he would show up from time to time to make camera appearances. So, but this is kind of like next to the American Bandstand and so much more. But this is a big part we remember about Dick Clark.
Well, he started with the appeal to the teenage crowd. That's how he started.
That's how he ended.
And I say he died a teenager.
He died the oldest teenager. That's how he was referred to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Gar, this is
a fitting way to end this episode.
Yeah, Gar, this has been a beautiful episode. I really enjoyed doing this. We've had fun doing our season of holiday-themed episodes. We'll get back to that next year. Now, next episode is going to be really fun because we got a lot of new fresh ideas of places to take the show that we've never gone before. To start with is our next episode, what we're calling the Cola Wars. And I got the idea to this, Gar. I was listening back to our episode we did on classic TV commercials, and we were talking about the Pepsi challenge. If you remember what that was, it was a taste. People would taste, and they'd be blindfolded. And they tell you if they thought it was Coke or Pepsi. And so we're going to get into that Pepsi challenge and a little more about detail of what that was and why the two companies were competing against one another and kind of our memories of that.
Well, just to give a little bit more of an excitement.
Yeah.
It wasn't a challenge.
Yeah.
It was a war.
Yeah, war. Yeah, Cola Wars. That's what I said. And Gar, when I got the idea to do this,
no, what I mean is they called it a challenge.
Yeah.
They really should have called it a war.
Yeah, and people are probably laughing at the thought of us doing a whole episode on that. But the more I think about it, Gar, and we get inspiration for our shows from many different things. I watch other people's YouTube videos and stuff to get to draw inspiration from, and I got thinking, I seen videos people do like on mall stores and stuff like that no longer exist, and you don't really think about like the fact that like I'm not a heavy soda drinker anymore, but I once was, and you don't stop and think about all the how much Coke and Pepsi means to you, or what a big part of it was. Even we're gonna get in this next episode, even like Michael Jackson doing the Pepsi commercial and hair catching on fire, but you wouldn't think like just a commercial like that would be a major memory in your life, but it has more impact, I think, than people even realize.
All of these things that you just mentioned are iconic moments in our life that are totally tied into what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, and you realize how much like Pepsi and Coke was tied into different things, even advertising, and being placed in movies and stuff like that. It just we're living our life, and at the time you don't realize how much of an impact this stuff has. Pop culture is much more than just TV shows, music, and movies, and we're kind of that's one more.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. That was rude.
No, that's all right.
What were you going to say?
That's just one more area of the show that we're going to kind of go in this year, and one more aspect. So we're going to continue doing what we do, but make it that much more interesting for people to tune into.
Absolutely. We're going to wind up, on a subject that doesn't seem to have a lot of fuel.
People will be surprised.
For discussion. I think people will be very surprised.
Yeah.
Because that episode is, it's really going to represent, the impact of that.
Yeah.
And how it wound up resulting in these other things that wound up occurring
Yeah.
that are completely tied into it.
Yeah, and just going back, Gar, to our classic TV commercial, that came up, the Pepsi challenge, and I totally forgot about that. I looked into a little, and you're going to be amazed all the stuff you find out about when you start doing the research. And I was like, wow, I forgot what a major thing that is. And apparently it's still taking place from time to time. But again, it's one of those things just not as heavily advertised. You ask anybody today, like from a younger generation, hey, have you heard of a Pepsi challenge? They're probably like, what's that? We're going to tell you what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something, that is a special, I mean, it's a warm and fuzzy part of, memories from that time period.
Yeah, it really is.
You know what I mean?
Well, Gar, another great show on the bag. This will be going up next Saturday. Take care, my friend.
All good, brother.
Bye.